and welcome to Hort-Talk episode 18, Peat-Free in a Retail Environment. I'm Alex Jenkins, your host, and today I'm joined by some very special guests who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Victoria Wright. I'm the Technical Manager at Hort-Talk.
Hi, I'm Jeff Caesar. I'm the Business Development Director at Allensmore Nurseries.
Hi, I'm Mike Burks. I'm Managing Director of the Gardens Group. We've got 3 garden centres in Somerset and Dorset.
Good morning, I'm Steve Carter from the Far Plants Group. I'm a Director of Far Plants. We're ornamental growers on the South Coast.
Thank you all very much, and thank you for agreeing to be part of our podcast today. So today we're going to be talking about peat-free in a retail environment. So I'm going to start with a question to all of you and just ask you to share a little bit about where your businesses began, where your journey began, that led you to be where you are today.
So, Melcourt is a growing medium manufacturer. Our sort of starting point was actually we've sort of arisen from the forest residues industry, and really the initial start of the business was producing mulches. Part of that production process was the generation of fine material, and it's those fines that we have developed into the growing media ingredient that we have today.
At Allensmore, we supply ornamental plants into retailers, and the business has for over 20 years really been looking at peat-free growing media, but it's only in the last 3 years really that we've focused on actually trying to take peat out of all of our production, and we've been going through that process for the last 3 years, and hopefully, we're well on track.
So I think we've been on our peat-free journey for probably 10 years or more, where we've been trying to reduce the amount of peat in our multi-purpose mixes that we sell to our customers, and also that we use in our own small nursery. It's a bedding nursery, so at the easier end of the growing scale of things. But in the garden centres, trying to educate our customers at the same time and wean them off peat. But actually, it's the last 3 or 4 years where this has really accelerated, and now, bar one product, we are completely peat-free, and that product arrived by mistake, and we're stuck with it. So I'm having to get rid of it in the next 2 weeks. So we otherwise would have been cheering that we are completely peat-free.
So, as I said, we're ornamental growers on the South Coast here at Far Plants, and I would describe it as being a long journey. Certainly, I started in the group in 2000, and we were doing trials back then. As a group, we've been involved in many projects, including the 5-year DEFRA HDB project, which involved about 28 organisations, 17 growers across the country, and 5 growing media manufacturers, plus machinery manufacturers and lots of researchers. So we've been very, very active for a long while. Over the years, we've trialled a significant number of peat-free products with a range of our crops that we grow. However, we grow about 3,000 different products. So although we've done a significant amount of them, we've still got a long way to go. And what we've learned as a group is that whereas with peat you can have multiple crops grown in one mix, with peat-free, they all respond differently. So we're having to relearn what mixes we're going to work with what particular crops.
Well, actually, that leads me on very nicely to my next question. Steve, thank you very much. I was going to ask, I mean, as an industry, we've been on quite a significant journey to peat-free, and I was going to ask you all to talk about some of those challenges and some of the successes as well that you've had in that journey. So you were just saying, Stephen, it is a big challenge is the fact that not all plants respond the same to the same growing media. Would anyone like to expand on that?
I'll just mention what we did as an initial trial to try and establish a baseline within the business, and that was to pot 20 plants of everything that we grow. So of every variety and every species that we grow, alongside our commercial production, we potted 20 plants in a peat-free equivalent. It wasn't easy to do that because we had to buy the base peat-free media. We've got 3 media suppliers, and so we bought their recommended base peat-free media, and then we added whatever the controlled release fertilizer that they use is. We added that to that mix ourselves. We mixed it on site, and we potted 20 plants into for each batch that we grew, and we didn't treat it any differently to how we treat the rest of the crop. So it got watered in the same way, it got grown over the same period, and then we observed what they were, and we did that on purpose. We didn't want to change anything that we were doing because we wanted to see what was genuinely different about it, and then we recorded the outcome as we went through the growing season with each of those batches. So it was a lot of work, but it was invaluable as far as we're concerned in being able to give us a real insight into just what the differences are between and it is a reduced peat mix. It's only got 35% peat in that we're using anyway. But it gave us a real insight into what the differences were. And there was in season there was 20% of those crops performed less well than the peat than the reduced peat mixes. So 80% of the reduced peat 80% of the peat-free mixes were performed well, but 20% we had issues with in season. Over winter, it was 40% did less well in peat-free media than in the 35% media. So we had, at least we'd set a baseline then, and we could start to work from there with the media suppliers and within our own production to make changes. We did that for 2 years before we actually started growing any crops in commercial volumes in peat-free.
I was on a very different scale, of course, but interesting. So on our own nursery, which is bedding plants, but it's a small nursery, but we've been peat-free now for 4 years. But I remember some of the early trials we did, and at the end of the rugby season, instead of rugby on a Saturday, I go and help water in the nursery, and I was looking at the crops. She said they're potted in peat-free, and I said, well, when did that happen? Yesterday. And so the change between the peat-based plants in the peat-based compost and the peat-free compost was dramatic after just 1 day. But we learned a lot from there. And now if we go into the nursery, and things look really, really good, but it's because we've had to change the way that we handle things. And one of the things we do is to use the products that we sell in the garden centre rather than commercial mixes. So that includes Melcourt products, Silver Grow, which has been very successful, and also Westland products, which in the bag product that we sell in the garden centre, and also Evergreen product as well, so that we can hand on the heart say to customers, yes, these composts do work, but they are different to using a peat-based mix. So it's really useful being able to use them and scale ourselves and then apply that. What I would say is, I said it earlier on, is actually I think it's relatively straightforward on the bedding plant front. You get problems with salvias and with petunias, but I'm starting on a crop which has to last for say 2 years or even into a third season. I can see that being a whole lot different challenge as well. So we feel much more comfortable about it now than we did, and we can hand on heart say to our customers, yes, it works, but these are the things you need to do differently in order to make it work.
And Victoria, what's your experience with supplying to retail and other professional sectors?
So we've been producing free growing media for 30 years, and our silver growth product is 10 years old this year. So that's a long time producing free media, and we've learned a lot in that time. But what we have done over that period is demonstrate that it is possible in peat-free gardening. And we have battled to some extent against the preconceived ideas. And that goes back to the point that Steve made about the material that was produced in the early 2000s, and how that affected people's opinions on peat-free media. We've learned a lot since then. And hopefully that can be seen in all the growing media manufacturers, that we have progressed away from those early pieces of work. And certainly in the last, I'd say, 4 years, some of those negative views about peat-free growing media have fallen away. And people are being much more open to the idea of not having peat and not using peat.
Would you say then, Victoria, that those negative views, that historical idea of what the early peat-free growing media used to be, is your biggest challenge when it comes to?
I think it's less so than it was 4 years ago. I think people are much more open to this idea that we're moving away from solely one ingredient to a range of raw ingredients, and understanding how those perform. Part of our business, where it came from, in the early days, we were actually producing small grade bark to be added to peat to alleviate some of the issues around peat. So I think it's, in terms of retail, in terms of the general garden public, they've been moving slowly away from peat for some time, not really actually realizing that they've been using peat-produced mixes.
Thank you. So what is everyone's thoughts on the manageable times for growers to be peat-free in context of DEFRA's intention for 2026? What do you think about the importance of a level playing field for UK growers and European growers supplying plants into the UK in terms of being peat-free?
If I can just come in on that, Alex, I mean, I think the first thing is, what do you define as 2026? Are we talking the end of 2026 or the beginning of 2026? Are we talking about sale of plants, or are we talking about production? Because if we're talking the beginning of 2026 and we're talking the sale of plants, the industry is not ready, and that's impossible, because there are plants already going into pots at the moment that will be sold in 2026. So unless you're there already, and not all the industry is, that's not going to be the case. If you're talking the end of 2026 and you're talking production going into peat-free mixes, then that is certainly doable. Although I think if you're talking across the whole industry, there's still a lot of work to do. And perhaps Vicky can answer a little bit more on this, what I'm going to say next, which is, we are still getting from growing media manufacturers the view that there isn't sufficient quality material to be ready for 2026, because they're having to basically supply the retail industry at the same time as getting growers on board. And although we're nearly there, we are significantly down that road. I think there's still a nervousness that there will be, emphasize that term quality. There will be enough sufficient quality material available to satisfy growers.
Certainly, in discussions that we have within the growing media industry, there is sufficient supply of things, certainly raw materials such as the wood, bark, coir products, that would be able to upscale in a relatively short amount of time. There's certainly a certain amount of processing to be done there, but the materials are available.
And that's one of the concerns for me as a from a retail point of view is that we've been weaning our customers onto peat-free composts, and they're getting successful with it. But if all of a sudden growers are competing for that same quality material, what we really don't want is for our amateur gardeners to then find that their mixes are changing and they're having to learn all over again, because that will have big damage to the whole industry. So I think the getting the timescale right is not just a case of whether growers have got the right skills to move across to peat free, and that obviously does need time, and there needs the right number of years to take crops from young plants through to finished product, which takes that's a long cycle on a number of crops. But also it's things that if we are then pinching that material from the retail side, we're going to have, we have so many changes of brands that are on the outside of the bag look the same as they were last year, but actually inside the bag is a different mix. And you just, with an amateur gardener, you can't keep doing that and expect them to have success, because it just puts them under too much pressure. They don't have the skills to do it. So that's one of my concerns. And the 2026, personally, I think from all of those reasons is too early. Much better to get it right and to have a 2030 date. I'm very keen to move away from peat, but it's got to be done in a nice, manageable way, and we have to have those quality materials available. So I'm encouraged at what you're saying, Vicky, on that front.
Yeah, obviously yesterday put a different spin on everything with the dissolution of Parliament next Friday. We will see where we are. The industry, the growing media manufacturers, have put a huge amount of investment, both ourselves and other companies, to prepare for this 2026 and 2028 date. So that investment is already there. Whatever happens with that 2026 date, we can't uninvest what we put in. So the growing media manufacturers have been spending a great deal of time looking at raw ingredients, understanding where they come from, understanding the challenges in making sure that we're receiving them as a quality and also at the quantity that we predict that we need. So yeah, all of that has been going on in the background. It's not very glamorous, looking at the plants that Steve and Jeff produce and Mike with his nursery, but we are doing the work.
So Jeff and Steve, you, like the HJ, are part of the RHS Peat Free Fellowship. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you got involved with that?
Alex, in your last question, you did ask about a level playing field across Europe.
Yes, please please answer that if you
as one of the questions, and I think that is really critical. I think it's difficult. I think that's going to be an issue for government to actually legislate and police, but without a level playing field, without the same requirement for incoming goods to be peat free as whatever requirement is put for UK growers, then that would be a disaster for the industry, and it wouldn't be achieving what the government is setting out to do, and that is to end the retail sale of peat in garden centres, and it does then simply allow non-UK production in with peat would be a disaster. And it wouldn't be a level playing field. The peat-free materials are more expensive than peat. They're considerably more expensive, and so we have to incur those costs. And they are more challenging. They're less forgiving, and they are more challenging to grow. That's the experience that we've had. It is possible to do it, but you have to learn. You have to change the way that you're operating. There is a cost to doing that. Wastage can be higher when there's issues with those sort of medias.
I was going to say I concur with Jeff. I mean, very simply, it is absolutely essential that there's a level playing field, and we consider it, as far as the industry is concerned, as non-negotiable.
It can't be possible it's not a level playing field, because as retailers, we commit to British growers as much as we possibly can, but if you're able to get a cheaper product that is on average going to be a better quality because it's being peat is being allowed in it, that it would just chop the legs away from the British industry, and as Jeff and Steve say, that's just would be devastating and will be so counterproductive to what the government are actually trying to achieve. And my only hope is that with DEFRA and the amount of work that the industry has done with DEFRA recently, particularly with HTA work that's been done, that they are starting to understand the scale of how much comes in from Europe, particularly from Holland. And I hope they're getting that now from the number of lorries that are not being inspected at the border. It's a big scale, and hopefully the same people will realise that and understand the implications of not making it a level playing field.
It does put, making it a level playing field has all kinds of impacts, because that will mean a lot of EU production going over to peat-free. It's difficult for EU growers because they haven't got those requirements in other countries at the moment. There's movement and there's interest and there's discussion, but there is no legislation that we're aware of. There's no specific target dates for being peat-free, and so that creates a load of challenges for EU growers when they are looking at the UK market. But it also massively increases the amount of peat-free media that's a growing media of constituents for those mixes that's going to be required across Europe.
And do you think that has, do you think the education of the final customer has any impact on that? Do you think the customer is willing to pay a premium for a UK grown peat-free product, or do you no,
No.
just shaking his head?
No, the consumer's not. I mean, I think if you ask, I think the reality is, if you ask most consumers about peat and whether they think it should be plants should be grown in peat or shouldn't be grown in peat, a lot of people are not yet up to speed with what the issues are. So they don't know that there's what the issues are with peat. They don't know about it being a carbon sink. They know a little bit sometimes about peat bogs and how you should look after peat bogs, but they don't actually know what the issues are. So why would they be prepared to pay more for a UK grown product or a UK? That's the same as if I go out and buy something, then I'm not prepared to pay more for it simply because it's been produced in the UK.
I think that conversation that Jeff's just had, Mike and I were on a call yesterday when we were talking with a few retailers who were mentioning that the number of complaints they get coming back about bagged material that they've used, and they've used the wrong material. So they've used soil improver to grow their bedding plants or to sow their seeds, and vice versa, and then found it hasn't worked. And at the end of the day, the view is that the consumer sees it as brown material. It's compost, it's dirt, it's soil. That's it. They don't understand it. So I know we'll come on to this. There's a lot of education that needs to happen at the retail end to the end consumer in order to get the message over of how to, as Mike referred to earlier, how to treat the product differently. We as growers are having to learn to water differently, to grow things differently, to feed differently. The end consumer will need to do the same, and we'll have to educate them. And the fact that actually, I think as described yesterday, there are some materials in the bag that you tip them out and go, this looks awful, what is it? And yet it'll grow a perfectly good plant. It's just, it's changing that concept of what actually you can grow in. I know going back, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, when wood fibre started to be used, and we got a lot of negative comments from the retailers saying, what is this stuff? The compost is blonde looking on the top. It's not the normal kind of brown colour. What's going on? And yet it works perfectly well in a mix. So we've got to totally re-educate, the retailers, but also then the end consumer.
I think in terms of bag product, the consumer is, prices have gone up significantly in the the last few years, and actually back probably up to a realistic price for a bag of potting compost, which is good news. And they've coped with that. The impact on plants, that's a bit trickier, and I think there's the sort of the knock-on effect of all of the additional costs coming through, and I think if you time traveled from 5 years ago to now, you would be shocked at the price of some plants, even though, of course, it's still an incredibly good value. And gardening is incredibly good value. It's so good for the environment and mental health and physical health and all those things. But yeah, there will be a limit to what prices are possible.
We do have to remember that that bag of compost has a huge value. So though people are seeing the prices rising, there's so much you can do with that bag. So many plants you can produce, vegetable transplants, you can, pots. It has this, it has the ability to add value. So I think people are certainly the conversations we're having with end consumers, they're starting to ask questions, and they're the right questions. They're curious. They want to know. I'm not saying that that's everybody, but certainly the conversations I've had, they're starting to see the value.
So, continuing in that conversation about the education of the staff and also of customers and also staff in retail, do you think the education piece is going to have a huge impact on the next phase of being peat free as an industry? And do you think there's going to be a shock if at some point in 2026 the endpoint product does have to be peat free? Do you think the customer is suddenly going to find that very difficult to deal with?
Well, from the conversations we've had, like I say, people are curious about the changes. They want to understand. They want to know how they can, what they need to change, how they can change. So we have some very positive conversations with the end consumer. And we do a lot of retailer education. So we'll visit the retailers, we'll talk to them about the ingredients, we'll talk to them about storage of media on their sites. And we'll speak a lot, of course, about the responsible sourcing scheme, which helps answer some of the questions that people have about the raw ingredients that are going into those bags.
I think this the education thing has got to continue, and and again, Stephen came at me yesterday, didn't it, with the sort of training modules that Alex, you and I were involved in 3 or 4 years ago. The modules that I think the DEFRA part funded, didn't they?
Yeah.
And that it's time to look at those again, because we've learned a lot since that time. And also then to make that information readily available to the gardener. And also, I think as an industry to have a consistent message, because sometimes on some of the television programs and stuff from bloggers, and you think you're actually, what you're saying there is not correct, and is not good advice, and mixing your own compost from a compost bin into a sophisticated product that's been trialed significantly is not going to improve results. So I think there's work to be done as an industry to get to our teams that are advising on the shop floor, garden centres, and in any retail really, but also advice that we're giving to the end user. Make sure that we're using consistent messages on that, and I think it's great timing to start to look at that information and to sort of dust it off and upgrade it really, and bring it back up to date.
I think from the perspective of education, there's 2 conversations here, or the retail end of things. The actual education of retailers and the end consumer is now. It's not a conversation about 2026, because they're having to deal with that material, as Vicky was talking about earlier, in bag product right now. And I think what I would say to retailers, the key thing is that bagged product they're selling is quality. We talked about that pinch point of not having enough quality material necessarily going into all bags. At the moment, there is bagged product out there which is not a good quality. And I think retailers need to ascertain from their suppliers which are supplying the decent stuff and which aren't, because bad experiences with the end consumer will just drive down sales. So as an industry, we've got a responsibility to make sure that there is quality out there. I would also, and Vicky mentioned earlier the responsibly sourcing scheme, I would also encourage retailers to sign up to the responsibly sourcing scheme, which effectively works with most growing media manufacturers to ensure that the product is responsibly sourced, that going forward we don't have environmental concerns with the new products, the new raw materials that we're using. And what's also essential is to make sure that your growing media manufacturer actually has had their product audited. So I would encourage retailers, same as growers, to get involved in actually responsible sourcing scheme going forward, because that's the way as an industry we actually ensure that the quality going forward and the standard going forward is right. And then the second part of that conversation, which is, as you're referring to, the grower end, the 2026 or whatever that date is going to be, but it is happening now because there's lots of products coming or going onto the marketplace now that's peat-free, or very, very little peat. The retailers need to get used to handling that product differently, same as we as growers are having to get used to it. And effectively, generally, I think that the overall theme is getting the watering right, which more often than not is a case of watering a lower volume more frequently. And that's the main difference you get with peat-free mixes. So essentially you're putting the same amount of water on, you're just putting it on many different times. So maybe 2 or 3 waterings a day rather than one single watering, for example. So that's something that retailers need to think about with regards to their retail spaces, their irrigation systems, but also communicating that to the end user as well. The other question is, of course, is whether they will need to change their feeding. So whereas, I know retailers don't do a lot of feeding of crops because generally they expect the grower to do it, but there's usually a point when the feed starts to run out. If a crop's been on the bench for a long while and feeding needs to happen, and it's possible that from our experience, you need to start feeding at an earlier stage with peat-free products.
It's interesting that actually crops, batches of plants that we have at the moment, at this peak of the season, are in and out so quickly that you tend not to see problems. Where we started, so last year particularly, I started to notice when stock was with us for more weeks as we got out of the spring season, so that they were there for sort of 2 or 3 times the length of time. And that's when we started to get quality issues, probably because we've got a mixture of peat-free plants grown in peat-free, some all in peat, and somewhere in between, and expecting, it's really detailed watering because you're moving from, I don't know, from a lavender, and then the next plant is a dogwood, and got to be very, very careful with the watering of those two. And then if they're in different mixtures anyway, it's really quite tricky. So sort of coming out of the season, I think we have to, as retailers, be much more on the ball with looking after these crops, and I think we will need to start feeding.
So is there any further advice that any of you have for retailers moving into their journey with peat-free?
So I think getting used to that difference in the watering, as I mentioned earlier, quality of product on retail bags, particularly education of the end user. And as we talked about, as Jeff was talking about a minute ago, nutrition is key. So the retailers are going to need to learn as much as what the growers are going to need to learn. And that's where I guess we need to have more education, but also more conversations between growers and retailers, I would suggest. And I know as part of the RHS project, the fellowship, there's a desire to get out there and educate the end user, plus also engage with retailers. And I know there's conversations going on at the moment between various parties to bring people together to go, let's get the message out there as an industry collectively. So the same message to all.
Yeah, I mean, change is coming, and I think it's about embracing that change positively. The UK horticulture industry is amazing. The things that it has achieved are astounding, really. And over the last sort of 20 years, you know, there's been a move away from pesticides. There's been this move towards more biological controls, and those have been challenges, and they have been faced with you know, increasing success. And I think this is just another one of those changes that if we all keep talking to each other, talking to the manufacturers, and we're all on this sort of journey of understanding, we can get some really positive outcomes from this. And certainly, you know, just making small changes in terms of maybe do you need pollinating? In some, maybe in just in some areas where there's, you know, it's more exposed on the garden centre, slightly hotter, drier area, rather than, you know, worrying about the really, if it's going to be a huge cost and it's going to need a lot of machinery. Actually just having those conversations early on that could be really valuable.
Communication is key.
Yeah, and I think that whole positivity is that, and that's, and I know it's the same approach with Steve's team because we talk to them, but that sort of, well, this is interesting, isn't it? This is going to be a challenge, but it's a technical challenge, and it's fascinating, and for our technical team as well, we enjoy a challenge, and to some extent, you know, the changes that we've had to make, learning about growing in a different media, it's a little scary at times because your whole business relies on success with this. Get it wrong and you can go out of business, you know. So it is scary, but it's planning how we were going to go about doing that, and working as a team on doing it, and the industry working as a team. We share, you know, all the reports from our HS trials, the other growers see, and we see theirs, and we read through them, and we learn from it, and I think the retailers are taking, you know, in those that are more positive are taking that same positive approach with it. Well, this is an opportunity to talk to our customers, let them know that what they've got is a product that's peat-free, and why that is a good thing, and what changes they need to make to have success in their gardens, which is good.
I think that's a key point as well, is that everyone here wants the same outcome, the manufacturer, the grower, the retailer. We want to produce good quality British grown plants in a peat-free grown media for the customer. So we've all got the same desire and outcome at the end of it, whatever the journey might be to get there.
Yeah, that cooperation and the talking with each other at all levels has been hugely powerful on so many different subjects, particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, and no more so than with the peat issue. And I think that if you're not already on that journey, you've got to get on with it, because it doesn't matter what happens on the 4th of July. The legislation is coming our way. We know that. And in fact, the more proactive we are, and I think that DEFRA are much more understanding, although we've still got a bit of a battle to have, I'm sure. But if we're seen to be willing, we will get much better results, I think, from government, because they know how much we've done. So that's really positive. So, and then there are some who will be hiding heads in the sand, but actually all you're doing is having a steeper cliff to fall off if you don't start now. And I know it's expensive, and I know it's tough, and I know actually if you're a retailer, there are cheaper products out there that you can buy, you can make margin, but actually we've got to move across. And the other thing is that you know, as if you look at it, even if you're not interested environmentally, if you look at it from a commercial point of view, the public are very, very interested in environmental issues. They have to be, because otherwise we're all going to die. And we've got to make those moves. And we are in an industry that can is great for mental health, great for physical health, can be great for the environment. We're in this perfect position of being something that can be the right industry for the challenges that the world faces. And there's not many others that are like that. So let's not drag our heels. I know it's tough, and I know it's expensive, but that we could be in a very good situation as a result of this. And so let's get on with it. But the consequences are pretty stark. And we can resist them, and we'll look like a dirty industry, or we can get on with it like we are doing, and we'll look positive. And so even if you're not interested in it from the moral point of view, it's a good commercial decision to get on with it.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up. I just want to say thank you very much to Vicky, Jeff, Mike, and Steve very much for being part of our episode 18 of Hort-Talk, peat-free in a retail environment. Stay safe, everyone. Take care.